All right, I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I am very, very excited about today's show. This show actually came to me from a meditation. I was walking in some beautiful areas, and I was very tuned into nature, and I heard Caenorhabditis Elegans. And I actually know what that is. That's a roundworm that has it's a microbe, and it has a very small number of genes, but so do we. DNA is not the answer. So that's part of the mystery of this little microbe. But we're going to get into that and a lot more. We're going to cover the solar micronova theory, the solar flash. We're going to talk about some Hindu ancient prophecies. And we're going to get into this concept of a living science and the idea that we are all connected to something akin to a biological internet, if you will. Some sort of energetic consciousness that actually informs biological life and gives rise to biological life. And ultimately, what my meditation was showing me is, why don't you combine the idea of the solar flash with the idea of adaptive energetic biology? So that's what we're going to do in today's show. I decided to call it Interplanetary Climate Change 2021 because interplanetary climate change is kind of the focal point for the evidentiary support of the solar flash. In other words, we're looking at the entire solar system getting brighter. The sun appears to be brighter. I don't think this is an illusion. A lot of people have noticed it seems like the light is coming out more whitish. Of course, this is not necessarily anything NASA has proven, but we have hundreds of data points from NASA that get into great specific details about many different anomalies occurring throughout our solar system. And typically what you have to look for is the word unexpected. So if you'd like to do this kind of research, look for the word unexpected or anomaly, but usually it's unexpected. And when you start looking at what is unexpected about the planets, the data comes in waves. Now, I've done the whole full breakdown of interplanetary climate change before, and there are other videos to reference. We didn't have a set this nice before. Today's show is not necessarily delineating each of the interplanetary climate change effects. I'm going to do some of that in my upcoming class. I'll tell you about this now because the Kali Yuga prophecies are remarkably accurate. We went through a bunch of the other ones on Sunday, but this one in Vanaparva, book 3 of the Mahabharata, is truly very apropos, okay? In the Kali age, which is where we are now, this is chapter 3, verse 187. The Brahmanas, which are the holy people, abstain, meaning they don't indulge in prayers and meditation. Even the holy people aren't doing it anymore. They're not meditating. They're too busy. Oh, they got to read Facebook. The course of the world looketh contrary, and indeed, these are the signs that foreshadow, the universal destruction. Well, that's the solar flash. They talk about it. They call it the Samvartika fire at the end of the age. It's the same thing, as you're going to see. And, O Lord of men, numerous Mleka kings then rule over the earth. And you know how there's a word called onomatopoeia or onomatopoeia, and it means that the word sounds like what it means? Well, in this case, I think Mleka is onomatopoetic, and it means right? It sounds like what it means, and it sounds like somebody's throwing up. So numerous Mleka kings ruling over the earth. Well, check this out. This is pretty obviously what it's starting to look like now, folks. It all sounded good for some people back when this was first happening. But even that picture of him, you remember I showed you this? And we keep zooming in on it, and we keep zooming in on it, and we keep zooming in on it, and we keep zooming in on it. What the heck is going on with his eyes? That's from the Drudge site, okay? So, yeah, would that kind of satisfy the criteria of Mleka King? I think so. And those sinful monarchs, remember, we're now reading something that's probably 12,000 years old based upon most of the records. This actually was written during Atlantis, okay? So this is very old because there's a lot of ETs around, a lot of stuff that hadn't happened after they all sank. And those sinful monarchs addicted to false speech, this is talking about the Mleka kings, right, who are here now. This is today's prophecy. The Kali Yuga is the age we're in now. Those sinful monarchs addicted to false speech govern their subjects on principles that are false. And men and women become short-lived, weak in strength, energy, and prowess, and endued with small might and diminutive bodies, they become scarcely truthful in speech. Many men and women at such periods strive to rob the wealth that hath from trust been deposited with them in secrecy. And, wedded to sinful practices, they shamelessly declare, there is nothing in deposit. Doesn't that sound familiar? 2008 perhaps, and on, and it's still going on. And in their 16th year, men are overtaken with decrepitude and decay, and the period of life itself is soon outrun. When the lives of men and women become so short, a drought occurs, extending for many years. 7 blazing suns, appearing in the firmament, drink up all the waters of the earth that are in rivers or seas. And then, O Bharata, the fire called Samavartika, impelled by the winds, appeareth on the earth, that hath already been dried to cinders by the 7 suns. Okay, that's really, really freaking scary, right? That's basically terrifying. Because they're describing exactly what's going on right now. And then they say, oh yeah, and then these 7 blazing suns appear in the firmament, drink up all the water on earth. Well, it could be that it's the 7 chakras of our sun as it goes through the solar flash. It's like, in the Law of One, they talk about 7 densities. There's actually 7 layers of energy in the universe. 7 sort of like dimensions, except that they all coexist in length, width, and height. A 3-dimensional space as far as its reference frame. Anyway, so this is pretty amazing. And there's hundreds of these mentions of the solar flash in the Hindu scriptures. So that's really your go-to. And of course, if you've seen me on Ancient Aliens, you know that they're describing vimanas, which are these flying craft, that they use particle beam technology, they have bizarre weaponry, they can fly through the side of a mountain, they don't make any sound except for a humming. And it's wars going on where they talk about the bolt of iron charged with the light of 1,000 suns that then causes elephants to scream and die where they are and leave shadows on the ground. It's nuclear, folks. They had a nuclear war, and the descriptions from the Hindu Mahabharata are totally that of a nuclear exchange. But in this case, what we're dealing with is something that's not based on people on Earth. It's a cosmic event. And it appears to be that this event is propelled by conscious energy. And so that's where we're going to get to pretty soon here, but just bear with me. So, what do they tell us is going to happen when we go through this wild, wild process? They say that we transition into what they either call the Satya Yuga or the Krita Yuga, and that's a very exciting place to be in. So this is now chapter 3, verse 189. And when those terrible times will be over, the creation will begin anew. The clouds will commence to shower seasonably, and the stars and stellar conjunctions will become auspicious, and the planets, duly revolving in their orbits, will become exceedingly propitious. And all around there will be prosperity, abundance, health, and peace. Then we get this Kalki avatar who arrives with the most amazing superhero abilities possible, fully stressing Marvel to the limit if they were going to make a movie about this. And commissioned by time, a Brahmana by the name of Kalki will take his birth. And remember, the Zoroastrian prophecies, by the way, say that this is something that is going to happen with many, many people, that they embody what in the Casey readings they call John Peniel, or the John the Beloved, the way shower for the coming Christ, which is actually this change in the sun's energy and what it's giving off in the solar system, okay? So the Kalki is this same concept as the second coming of Christ. Different religions call it different things, but you can't get around the idea that the galactic mind is Christ. That's what the Law of One teaches us. That's my source text. And therefore, the Christ consciousness is the Kalki. It's the same thing. So this is talking about the second coming of Christ, just so that we're clear. They didn't know what to call it back then, so they called it Kalki. A Brahmana by the name of Kalki will take his birth. He will glorify Vishnu, which represents the one infinite creator, and he will possess great energy, great intelligence, and great prowess. Vehicles, weapons, warriors, arms, and coats of mail will be at his disposal as soon as he will think about them, meaning he just manifests all these things out of thin air with his mind. That's amazing. He will be the King of Kings. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, folks? What did I just say? There you go. He's the King of Kings, and ever victorious with the strength of virtue. And he will restore order and peace in this world, crowded with creatures and contradictory in its course. And that blazing Brahmana of mighty intellect having appeared, will then destroy all things. Well, that's not very nice. Why would he want to destroy all things, man? That's not very nice. Well, it's about a transformation. So there must be a change first that appears destructive. This is what the sun is doing. Remember, we're once again hearing about all the oceans being evaporated at once. Well, it's not really going to be that bad, but there is a lot of heat that the sun apparently gives off. So you want to be in the next density. You want to layer up, let's say. Just like you might want to lawyer up, you want to layer up. You want to layer up to fourth density, which means just be nice. Is it really so hard to be kind to people? Apparently it is, or else we wouldn't have to teach you this over and over and over and over and over. All right. And he will be the destroyer of all, and he will inaugurate a new yuga. And surrounded by the Brahmanas, that Brahmana will exterminate all the Malekas, wherever these low and despicable persons may take refuge. When the Brahmanas will have exterminated the thieves and robbers, there will be prosperity everywhere on earth. Okay, so you see why I wanted to give you the Zoroastrian one before this? Because the Zoroastrian one came from Ahura Mazda many thousands of years later, and he was following up on what he already knew was written. If you read the original Mahabharata version, it sounds as if the people who are eliminating the Maleka kings are some sort of ascended beings with superpowers. However, if you get the Zoroastrian version, which might have been like an edit, okay, it says no, it's actually just really normal, good people who are becoming awakened to their own inner one creator within them. And then by that awakening, they are then going out there and taking decisive action, peaceful action that leads to us having the world that we want. Well, that's the alliance. So those are the Saoshyants, or what they call here the Brahmanas. So no, we don't all have superpowers. The Zoroastrian prophecy, I believe, clarified that much of this work is going to get done by ordinary people. All right. So when the Brahmanas have exterminated the thieves, robbers, and Malekas, there will be prosperity everywhere on earth. This is exactly what I believe we're going through right now in the form of Kalki, symbolically the destroyer, symbolically these 8 faculties, okay? But at some point, I think we are going to see ascended beings that have these faculties. So we're going to go through them. This is from Virtual Maastricht McLuhan Institute, and they talk about how the Kalki will have great power, might, dominion, supremacy, dignity, and superhuman power. So there's 8 abilities. The ability to become small, the ability to become extremely light, the power to attain anything, this is like instant manifestation, irresistible will, this would be like influencing people with your mind and they can't resist you, which would only be used benevolently because that's what the Kalki is there for, is to clean things up. Limitless bulk, that means you could make yourself very, very, very large, like a Marvel hero, right? Supreme dominion, which again is the dominion over your animal passions. It's meditation, it's somebody who's fully, fully spiritually integrated. Subjugation by magic, meaning that they have subjugated their ego by this magical process. So that again is similar to number 6. And again, number 8, the power to suppress all desire, meaning this is only going to be done for the highest purposes. There is no desire for revenge. There's no desire for violence. Well, there might be violence, but there's no desire to do it other than what needs to be done to balance the karma. Okay? So this is a very, very exciting prophecy that fits with the other ones where we get Saoshyants or Brahmanas, and in the Zoroastrian tradition, again, they're eliminating evil on earth through ongoing effort. And the Zoroastrian tradition, by the way, says Ahriman, or Satan, they call it Ahriman, that Ahriman is built to be defeated. The whole thing is designed for Ahriman to be defeated. That's what the system is made to do. Ahriman gets wiped out. So let's go wide for a little bit. What we're now looking at here is an incredible body of ancient prophecy that all seems to be saying that the sun is going to do something. I became aware of these ascension prophecies in the 1990s. And even all the way back then, I said, you know, if the sun is going to have that kind of a discontinuous energetic change, if space, time, matter, energy, consciousness is going to go through a literal dimensional shift, there's no matter what, there needs to be some sort of visible, tangible things in the solar system that would represent the energetic increase that we should be seeing, and then the resulting changes that that energetic increase would create. So that's where interplanetary climate change comes in. This is, again, the concept that the stars all have their own clocks that they're on. And it's a sacred geometry, ultimately. We're going to talk about this in Gateway to Galactic Mind. I hope to see you there. Again, ascensionmysteryschool.com. The galactic mind programs us to go through a sudden energetic shift, and energy itself pushes us through this. So I was reading the Law of One talking about this, and it was talking about this increase in energetic potential. And they even described that it's like physics, where there's stored potential energy that then becomes kinetic. So I said, well, I got to start looking at the solar system, and I got to see what's going on. And that's where, beginning in 2000, in December 2000, I'll never forget it, a colleague of mine, when I was doing a seminar tour, my scientific colleague, leaked to me this paper from Russia that was online, but nobody knew about it. And it was by Dr. Alexei Dmitriev, and it was called Planetophysical State of the Earth and Life. It doesn't sound very exciting at all. Oh yeah, I remember now. So the interplanetary climate change. So this guy leaks to me the Alexei Dmitriev's paper, Planetophysical State of the Earth and Life. And I start reading this on an airplane coming back from the conference we did. And I'm so excited because here's a Russian scientist who's gone through the whole solar system and knocked down all of the different planets with clearly obvious energetic changes. And he's presenting a Russian scientific model that explains all of these changes as part of an energetic change of state. So just to give you an example of some of the really cool stuff that was in there, he talked about the solar system as being an electrical system. And he said that the electroconductivity of our solar system is increasing. So what's happening is, if you think about it this way, look at a pot on the stove, and look at what happens if you drop some water in that pot and it's not being heated. Nothing's going to happen, right? The water just sits there on the pot. But if the pot is nice and hot and then you drop some water on it, what's going to happen? It sizzles all around. So the equivalent of that would be the time that it takes for solar particles to reach the Earth through interstellar and interplanetary space. In this case, just interplanetary space. Guess what? It goes a lot faster because the energy in our solar system is charging up. There's more energy, so the particles move faster. So Dr. Dmitriev showed several examples of huge increases in solar particle emissions. He showed several scientific examples that the sun is getting significantly more magnetically charged, over 200% more magnetically charged. He didn't really have anything on Mercury. I found that later. Tons of stuff on Mars, tons of stuff on Earth, tons of stuff on Venus, tons of stuff on Jupiter, tons of stuff on Saturn. Uranus, not as much. I did a lot more on that. Neptune, not as much. I did a lot more on that. And Pluto, not as much. I did a lot more on that. But I then came in 2004 and followed up on what he was doing and really just knocked it all out with American NASA research, because Americans don't think Russian science is science sometimes. You'd be amazed what these self-educated skeptics will say, these autodidactic, supposedly geniuses, who still don't actually understand what's going on. They think they're a genius. They might wear a little bow tie and tell you that they're a genius, but they don't know everything. Ooh, I'm going to get in trouble now. Okay, anyway. The whole solar system is charging up. And I have a few images of this that we're going to see at the end, but the point is, that was where the science started to come in on a major, major level to convince me that these ancient prophecies had validity. Then the question is, can we actually find scientific backing for the idea of a solar flash itself? Okay, so nowadays, you're starting to hear about it being called a solar micronova. And there's lots of research on this going out there. Also, a mini supernova is another similar term. And we have to acknowledge here that conventional science, as presented by the mainstream media, doesn't have all the answers. Here's our dear old friend Phil Plait, who has been attacking everything cool for like 30 years. on Bad Astronomy and other places. We love you, Phil, but come on, man. Some of this stuff is true. You got to at least once in a while open your mind a little bit, buddy. Anyway, he says, no, there's no such thing as a solar micronova. Well, apparently NASA doesn't think so, because here's a NASA page saying that a mini supernova explosion could have a huge impact. Sorry, Phil. So what we're dealing with is that everybody right now in the scientific community says, ooh, look at all these equations. You know, and science has become like a language of the elite. It's very similar to the idea of when the Catholic priesthood would not allow you to look at the Bible, right? It's all in Latin, so even if you could get your hands on it, you can't read Latin. They read the Vulgate in Latin, so you don't even get to understand what they're saying. And unfortunately, much of science and all these equations that come flying past you, it's all very similar sounding, you know? So we need a new science that actually integrates spirit and biology, because that's something that was part of this unholy alliance between Christianity, the Romans really, and the scientific community. They said, science, you guys take the material world, leave the spiritual to us, don't research it, and don't even act like it exists. So then you have the scientist who, during the week, proves that God doesn't exist, but then on the weekend he prays to God at church. Or at least he used to in a more traditional society. So what the Russians really brought to attention is an amazing new science that actually integrates spirit with matter. So this is, if you will, the science of God. This is the science of higher consciousness. This is the science of the universe and of where we're going and how this all links together. And so back to the slide again, I believe that this is the key to understanding the solar flash and what is really going on here and why this thing is not a catastrophe. So I'm going to show you some of the crown jewels, because honestly, with all the stuff going on in the world, I want you to have this now. I don't want to make this hidden behind a paywall, and I have so much more that I'm going to go through in Gateway to Galactic Mind. As I said to my wife, I have too much information. So let's put some of this out there so I can get into the deeper stuff in Gateway, which I hope to see you again. AscensionMysterySchool.com starts this Sunday. It'll be very loaded with slides and amazement. And we got a payment plan, so you can start off on 111 and we'll take it from there. If the society still exists, then you have to keep paying us. But if not, then you're off. You're off the hook. All right, so the DNA can't hold all the information to make life, right? And this is something that we've talked about where if you take the DNA, here it is wrapped up inside a chromosome, and you unwrapped the DNA and then you dropped it out of a helicopter, like by chopping it up into individual pieces. And then you tried to get the DNA to land on the ground in the same way that it was when you dropped it out of the helicopter, the equivalent of how difficult that is, which is, again, the idea that DNA randomly evolved. You like that? You like that love that I'm giving you? The love that eyebrows can give? It's love, baby. What I'm going to tell you is this. DNA is impossible to be made randomly, because to do it with an encyclopedia would be the equivalent of chopping up every word out of the encyclopedia as a separate word and dropping it out of a helicopter and expecting it to all be laid out on the ground in perfect pages the way it was in the encyclopedia. It's that stupid. The DNA is way, way too complicated to have evolved by random processes, and we also know that Earth is only 4 billion years old. Earth only cooled down enough for liquid water to exist 3.8 billion years ago, and guess when microbes show up? 3.8 billion years ago. And by the time you get microbes, almost all of the heavy lifting to make life has been done. You have cell mitosis, you have all the different organelles inside the cell, they reproduce, they excrete, they eat, they respirate. It's all there right at the beginning. So no, it doesn't happen over a long period of time. It happens immediately as soon as a DNA shows up on Earth. It's already there with the water. So check this out. The human body, they're trying to say the Human Genome Project. Let me just set this up a little bit. So the Human Genome Project was trying to tell you that DNA makes life. And this has become extremely important because people are now being very, very worried about DNA alteration and methods that might be causing that to happen. Boy, am I being careful. So, this gene model of DNA is saying that your genes make up who you are, that it's all in your DNA. Is that true? No. Here we go. The human body has 70 to 90,000 different proteins in it, and these are different things that build the tissues in your body. Up until the year 2000, when they did this Human Genome Project, the scientists believed there must be at least one different gene in the body to make each protein. So there might be a protein that makes the sclera in your eye. There's another protein that makes ligaments in your shoulder. There's another protein that makes liver cells, pancreatic cells, fascia, muscle tissue, fingernails, right? Everything is made from a protein. Everything that your body is made of needs a different protein, and so they believed that you have to have instructions for those proteins, right? That's what you've been told. Oh yeah, your DNA has all the instructions. Well, the most primitive thing DNA would have to do if it had all the instructions is at least have instructions for the difference between this type of brain tissue versus the difference between the pons and the medulla versus the difference between the hair cells in your arm, et cetera, right? 70 to 90,000 of these proteins that you need to be able to write out of DNA in order to have those be coded with a specific DNA address. They didn't find it. Check it out. Until 2000, scientists believed there must be at least one gene for each protein. Yeah, Bruce Lipton, absolutely. And we are going to get to him. That was from Ruby Koheliehi. I can't read that. Sorry, Ruby. They also believed we had another 30,000 genes on top of 90,000 to regulate our cell growth and behavior, to create awareness, emotion, and intelligence. And now here's where we get to watch scientists be really embarrassed and back away and do their little dance, right? Because what happens? 70 to 90,000 proteins plus another 30,000. And remember, up until 2000, they talked about the genetic model of DNA all the time. All the time they said, oh yeah, DNA is made from genes, and genes are what make your body, and the DNA has everything in it. It's an encyclopedia for how to make your body. Well, dude, we need like 90,000, we need 90,000 genes to make just the proteins in our body. Then we need another 30,000. So drum roll, please. How many genes did we actually have? Back to the slide. Are you ready for this? Whack, whack. Only 34,000. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Right? Oh my God. So now they don't talk about it anymore because they didn't find enough genes. That means the DNA does not make your body. There's something much greater. There's an information field. There's a template of living conscious information, intelligence, that actually makes life. And you cannot get around that. You cannot get around the fact that the DNA doesn't have everything it needs in there. But it is an antenna that lenses into fields that exist. So you can move it around, you can clone it, it'll tap into those energy fields, and it will get more information. This is why if you take the embryo out of a mother's womb, it'll only grow to about 80 cells and then it stops. It should be able to keep growing in a test tube. We haven't been able to get that to work. And the reason why apparently is that the mother's body gives energetic fields to the baby's developing fetus that tells it how to grow. The cells need the knowledge that the mother's body has, or they will not grow into a baby. You can't just make one in a tube. We haven't been able to do that yet. But extraterrestrials apparently have, but we don't know how to do it. So only 34,000 genes in the whole frickin' genome? Uh-oh, what do we do? Well, here comes Caenorhabditis elegans, this little microbe widely studied in laboratories, and his little body has exactly 969 cells, and he uses every one of them. His little brain, we were talking about, the dog's brain is the size of a walnut. We were talking about that with our girlie and how she could choke on things. And anyway, poor little Caenorhabditis elegans, he only has 302 brain cells. But he's using them, man. He does what he needs to do, okay? He's getting around. The human body has 50 plus trillion cells. Now, he's got, this is really, really rich, folks. He's got 302 brain cells. He's got 969 cells in his whole body. How many genes do you think he has? How many genes do you think he has? 24,000. Look to the slide. He's only got 10,000 genes less than us, folks, and he's only got 302 brain cells. You think DNA is where the answer is? Bah! The fruit fly only has 15,000 genes in total. So there you go. The human body only has 10,000 more genes than the very simplest and most primitive organism we've ever been able to study. Oh, well, the 10,000 must have lots and lots of good stuff in them. No. All right, so this is something else we got to get into right now. Garyaev, the different scientist than Dmitriev. Dmitriev's the guy that did the interplanetary climate change. Garyaev in 1984 took DNA and put it into a small quartz container, and then he zapped light into this room where the DNA was. Normally with a photon counter, you can see there's light all over the room. But when you put DNA in the room, what do you think happens to the light? Well, supposedly nothing, okay? So I'm not going to go too fast because this is really intrinsic, okay? We just showed you that DNA cannot be the answer for all the proteins in the body because we only have 10,000 more genes than the frickin' Caenorhabditis elegans microbe. Whoa. What? So then, this is a dirt simple experiment. You just take DNA and you put it in a room where there's some light and you see what happens to the light. Well, sure enough, the DNA absorbs all the light into itself, and I'm going to show you this right now. Check this out. So when DNA is in the room, it actually acts like a miniature black hole. It seems to have a gravitational field, and it absorbs photons into the DNA molecule. So here we go. On the top, you see the background empty space, and so each dot on this graph represents an individual photon, which again is just light. Then, when you look at what happens on the bottom graph, that curvy line is the DNA molecule. So it happens to have struck on an angle in this case, depending on, how they aimed the sensor, I guess. There isn't one dot that is not in that squiggly line, which again is the DNA. You imagine a double helix on that line, you can kind of see what it looks like. So that's your DNA, folks. You're seeing the DNA double helix right there, and you're seeing that there are no dots left outside where the DNA is. Well, the craziest part of this story, of course, is wait a minute. DNA is not supposed to be doing this. DNA is not supposed to act like a black hole. DNA isn't supposed to have a gravitational field that attracts light. Well, this is just part of a very fascinating science of life, teaching us that light is actually where the magic is, and the DNA is lensing the light. The DNA is an antenna for the light. The DNA draws light into itself, doesn't it? It's attracting light. You put it in a room where there's light everywhere, and then it sucks all the light up. This clearly implies that light is extremely important to the processes of DNA. Now, I come up empty-handed with Western scientific models that would try to propose this. So in some cases, I had to design my own, just based on combining information that the Russians and others had developed. But the idea here is that light is intelligent, light is alive, and light actually has complex genetic information stored in it. And all of this is going to become very important, of course, because the sun's giving off light that's going to have complex genetic information stored in it. And if the sun gives off different light, it might have different biological effects on us. It might be changing us right now, and that is what's happening. Back to the slide. So this is the little setup that they had. This is from Institute of Heart Math about that experiment. DNA absorbing all the light, and this is how they counted the photons and proved that this was happening. Now this gets even more interesting, and it's very, very relevant to all the stuff people are talking about online right now, about DNA being altered, and oh my God, if you had your DNA altered, are you definitely going to expire? Well, look, that's not true. We are not seeing what everybody seems to think is going to happen, and when I say everybody, I mean a lot of people who are not being allowed to talk about this. It hasn't happened yet. We haven't seen any type of massive anything. So don't necessarily assume that this is what's going to be the outcome. There's many ways that it might not be the outcome. What if, for example, the Alliance has an antidote? What if the people who built whatever this thing is had the antidote all along and we already know where it is? I don't know if that's true, and I hope it's true. But also, even if the Alliance is going to have to throw up its hands and say, look, guys, there's nothing we can do about this. You're going to have to be on immune support for the rest of your life. You're going to have to take all these things to bolster your immune system. That's possible. I think it would be more like something like that instead of the idea that everybody who got it is gone. That's ridiculous, but I'm hearing a lot of this. And this is a legitimate fear. We're at a point in time where everybody's afraid. They don't know what's going to happen. They're terrified that if anybody got this, that they're gone and there's no turning back. And when I went into the health food store the other day, everybody in the health food store was talking about this. Everybody was talking about this. The gas shortage, the war, all the stuff that's happened this week, the generals and what they're saying, people are on it now. And it has become the common dialectic. It's become the common discussion. So look, I'm not worried about it because the higher beings have never allowed there to be a nuclear exchange. They've been preventing this for a very long time, and now they're trying to come out with this as if it's a bad thing. Actually, I think that I'd like to have some higher beings that have our interests in mind and aren't going to let us just fire these things off. And they did it across the board with every different country. They didn't single one country out. Is this a prelude to a hostile invasion? Well, dude, they've been around for thousands of years. Why would they want to invade right now when you guys desperately wish they would? Because you need something. They're not. It's not the real ones, at least, right? We talked about the stealth blimp, the flying pyramid that... Oh, it's so amazing, it's so amazing. No, it's just a classified project that was started by Arion Corporation and then got bought out by Lockheed and made undercover, and then they start flying it over the Hudson Valley in the 1980s. Oh my God, it's just a freaking blimp, okay? So we got to be smart. You have to use your intelligence, and you have to say to yourself, don't you think the Alliance covered for this? Don't you think they have some kind of plan to make sure that not everybody who inadvertently did something that maybe they regretted later on is going to just freaking die on the spot in a couple months or maybe in a couple of years? Look, even if we don't have something, I'm sure that the higher forces do, because if they could stop an exchange of those types of weapons, they could do anything. And so we also have heard from many prophetic sources that we are protected as we go through this transformation. So again, I've dreamed on this a lot. I've tried to tune into it intuitively, and I don't see that everybody who participated is just going to expire. I don't, okay? But also, we might need some human ingenuity. We might need people to invent something that hasn't been invented yet. But again, what if this, let's go here. What if this whole concept of the body being able to have its genetic code rewritten and then start to shed certain things and become a factory that produces certain things that you really don't want? That whole concept is based on reductionistic, materialistic biology in which genes are supposedly what makes you. Your DNA supposedly makes you, right? So if you have 24,000 genes in Caenorhabditis elegans microbes and 34,000 genes in the human body, maybe altering the DNA isn't going to do as much as we think. In other words, people might think that if they alter DNA that they're going to get certain results, but the Creator, God, might have a different idea. There might be a different idea than that. So check this out. I want you to think about the reason why my guides, if you want to call them that, gave me this information in meditation is to talk to you about what's happening right now, to talk to you about whether you should be afraid of what's going on, to talk to you about the real essence of biological life and what is it, because biological life is made of DNA codes that are not encoding 90,000 proteins. Something else is encoding those proteins, and it has to be moving through the DNA because you can clone people with DNA. So DNA does tune into something. But what do we know it's doing now? It's drawing in the light. Imagine if I was DNA, and all the light in this room, the room goes completely dark, and now I'm glowing, okay? Well, the most amazing thing about this Russian scientific experiment is that when they took the DNA out of the room, the light in the room where the DNA was continued to hold in place for not 1 day, not 5 days, not 10 days, but 30 days. They had a DNA phantom. So there was a hidden structured gravitational field, a structured energetic gravitational field that held the light in place. So the gravitational force that did not require the DNA. It's the precursor to the DNA. Quantum physics makes life. Back over here now. Quantum physics makes life. Quantum biology, as Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's the one that talked about Caenorhabditis elegans. I give him all the credit for this. It's wonderful that he's been doing this for so many years. I just want to add to it and use that discussion as a platform for what we're hearing about now. Because people are really freaking scared about what certain people got shot up with and what does that mean. And I'm telling you, it's not as easy to write it off as, oh my God, this is so horrible as you think. Because nature has lots of little funny tricks in it. So check this out. This is unbelievable. We're going to talk about Dr. Robert Pruitt and how mustard weed can heal itself. So here's Dr. Robert Pruitt. He's a legitimate scientist. He's published in the field. And this is what he discovered. This is back in 2005, March 23rd, New York Times. It says, startling scientists. Plant fixes its own flawed genes. In a startling discovery, geneticists at Purdue University say they have found plants that possess a corrected version of a defective gene inherited from both of their parents. Oh, come on. It's not a gene. As if some handy backup copy with the right version had been made in the grandparents' generation or earlier. The finding implies that some organisms may contain a cryptic backup copy of their genome that bypasses the usual mechanisms of heredity. If confirmed, it would represent an unprecedented exception to the laws of inheritance discovered by Gregor Mendel in the 19th century. Equally surprising, the cryptic genome appears not to be made of DNA, the standard hereditary material. And I really don't want to insult these guys, so I'm going to try not to. But this is just a function of flawed logic based on the idea that it has to be a genome. Well, if it's not the genome that we've identified, then it must be a cryptic one that we haven't seen yet. I mean, you gotta bring in the Russians, and you gotta honor that Russians could actually be scientists and actually do something cool, right? Let's just not be racist and not be classist and not be nationalist. Yeah, the Russians could have figured out some cool stuff, and they did. And that's why light is absorbing into the DNA, because the light is very, very important. The light actually carries the genetic code. So they didn't know this back then, and so they had to say, well, it must be some cryptic hidden genome that's not DNA that we haven't seen. But now you've knocked away all the genetic models anyway because there's only 34,000 genes in a human body. Well, this becomes very important because what we're seeing here is the mustard weed fixing itself when it's impossible that it could have fixed itself if DNA is what we think it is. Now, why? Because the whole entire plant grows from one DNA molecule in this case, in this experiment. And this DNA molecule has had the genes completely removed. There's nothing in the DNA that should be able to reproduce those genes. They've been cut out, and the theory is that all of that should lead to genetic mutations. So let's go back to the slide now. Next guy we're going to meet is Dr. Elliot Meyerowitz. You're going to read about him in a second in this quote. He says, "It looks like a marvelous discovery, according to Dr. Elliot Meyerowitz, a plant geneticist at Caltech. Dr. David Haig, an evolutionary biologist at Harvard, described the finding as a really strange and unexpected result, and it would be very important if the observation holds up and applies widely in nature." So this is Dr. David Haig, in no way intending to be mistaken with David Hogg. And he's got that, oh, he's so sassy. He's got that little grin. He's just so sassy. I'm sorry, did I just do that? I didn't do that. Dr. Pruitt and Dr. Lally were trying to understand the genes that control the plant's outer skin, or cuticle. As part of the project, they were studying plants with a mutated gene that made the plant's petals and other floral organs clump together. This sounds exciting. I'm not going to go there, folks, you know. But I have to redeem myself a little bit after just making a gay joke. I'd like to have some that, we're not going to go there. Anyway, so this gene causes a genetic abnormality in the flower that we're going to see here in a moment. And if you remove those genes, if you remove the genes that make it work properly, then theoretically you should have mutant plants that stay mutated. Because each of the plant's 2 copies of the gene were in mutated form, they had virtually no chance of having normal offspring, at least in the conventional model, right? But up to 10%. 1 out of 10 plants that you do this with kept reverting back to normal. Now notice it's not the majority. It's only 1 out of 10%. What is the criteria between those 1 out of 10% as opposed to the other 9? Right? We don't really know, because 10% is 1 out of, it's 1 out of 10 basically. So I'm reducing it. So 1 out of 10 of these plants is going to grow back the DNA that you take away. Is it that the plant has more energetic connection to these photons? Can it draw more of this light in? And the light, somewhere in the light is information that tells it how to make its own plants. That appears to be what's going on. Remember in the pyramid episode, we talked about extinct versions of ferns that were growing around where these Russian pyramids were built, and they hadn't been seen for millions of years. This again suggests that energy can change biological life, and somehow building a pyramid could have an energetic effect on life. So 1 out of 10, if you try to cripple their DNA, you try to destroy their DNA, they're supposed to die, or at least they're going to be mutated forever, right? You're trying to ruin these plants by screwing with their genetics. 1 out of 10, it doesn't happen. Isn't that interesting? And might it be a little bit relative to everything else we've been talking about right now? Yes. When the researchers analyzed the mutated gene known as hothead, or HTH, they found that it had changed, with the mutated DNA units being changed back to their normal form. Wow. So here is your mutated mustard weed, and what we're seeing here is that the flower petals are starting to burst out of the bottom of the flower. This means the flowers are going to look horrible. They're not going to open. It's a big mess. The plant doesn't do what it needs to do. It's a mutant, and it's not a good one. This is what you want it to look like, and this is what 1 out of 10 of them do. 1 out of 10 of them go back to being mustard and growing like mustard. So again, back to Dr. David Haig, not David Hogg, the finding poses a puzzle for evolutionary theory because it corrects mutations, which evolution is depending on as generators of novelty. Well, it's a little, leave it on screen for a second, man. It's a little more than a puzzle, because think about this. You don't have an answer. You don't have a way in which random mutation can create evolution if random mutation gets corrected by some energetic blueprint that they didn't want to think that far, because it's a whole new paradigm, right? It requires a whole new paradigm. So they're like, well, there must be some cryptic DNA hidden somewhere. Well, nobody's ever found it. There's no genetic evidence of it whatsoever. We've never found it. Oh, well, there must be a backup copy and something else besides DNA. You're on the right track. It's just that the Russians back in 1912 with Dr. Alexander Gurvich said that it was energy, because Gurvich took one onion and aimed it at the side of another onion, and where the growing tip of one onion hits the other onion, you get this weird bump that grows on it. Super accelerated growth. That was the first study in 1912 that keyed in the Russians to the idea that energy is somehow relevant, and it had something to do with photons, because if you took a piece of quartz that allows ultraviolet light to go through, then the effect works. But if you put glass in between the tip of the onion and the side of the other onion, then it never grows. Glass? David, what is it about glass that's different than quartz? Glass blocks ultraviolet light. It blocks ultraviolet light, whereas quartz allows ultraviolet light to pass. So it's the ultraviolet light somehow that was causing the other onion to grow. Well, the Russians had this in 1912, so they've had a lot of time to think about this and do lots and lots of experiments. So there's over 40,000 scientific papers published on what they call torsion fields and what I call the source field. It's subject to my first book. So here again is a link, the actual photograph of this whole study being published. And again, I want you to think about this right now. 1 out of 10 of these guys fixed their own DNA. So if you try to mess with DNA, DNA fixes itself. The same thing's going to be happening now, I believe, and I think the ETs can help us quite a bit on this. There's another example of this, and this is Drosophila, which is the basic, simplest, most primitive organism that you ever see that they use as an insect in these lab experiments. They grow very quickly. They only live for like 1 day. And so they can try to mutate them. They've created plenty of mutations deliberately. This is from Rupert Sheldrake, off of sheldrake.org, and I really support him. I interviewed him for Gaia, so you can go back and watch that interview on Gaia. A new theory of evolution, he says. A great deal of work is being done in contemporary biological research on such tuning mutations, formerly called homoeotic mutations? Homoeotic mutations, formerly called. You know, if you add an R, it becomes something else. So, like, yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to not call it homoeotic. Homoeotic mutation. Oh my God. But yeah, so the idea, back to the camera, the idea is that these morphic fields, that's Sheldrake's interpretation, that these are energetic templates in the universe that we tap into that are intelligent and conscious, and that inform biological life to make DNA grow. Even if the DNA molecule has been messed with and you tried to screw it up to cause all these problems, God just says, no, we'll fix all that. At least 1 out of 10, even if it's mustard. So what happens with a fruit fly? Check this out. The animal most used in these investigations is Drosophila, the fruit fly. A whole range of these mutations have been found, which produce various monstrosities. One kind, called antennapedia, leads to the antenna being transformed into legs. Ooh, that's gross. The unfortunate flies, which contain just one altered gene, only one gene, produce legs instead of antenna growing out of their heads. Yuck. There is another mutation which leads to the second of the 3 pairs of legs in the Drosophila being transformed into antenna. Well, that's not quite as bad. I mean, you might be able to use those. You never know. This is evolution, baby. Not really. Normally, flies have 1 pair of wings, and on the segment behind the wings are small balancing organs called halteres. Still another mutation leads to the transformation of the segment normally bearing the halteres into a duplicate of the first segment, so these flies now have 4 wings instead of 2, and these are called bithorax mutants, okay? So this is what they're doing. They're tinkering around with these poor little guys, they're messing with their DNA in the lab, and they're making them into monsters where they got legs coming out of their head. Okay, if you did this with humans, you'd be violating all kinds of ethics laws. What happens when you start tinkering around with DNA like this? If you get the guy that has the legs growing out of his head, and then he mates with another one that you make with legs growing out of her head, and then they have little babies, did their babies have legs growing out of their head? That's the interesting question. And as you can probably guess, there's a self-correcting mechanism involved. So this is the most frequently studied insect in science. Ooh, I don't know what happened with that. That's a really strange effect. Okay. Take the single fertilized cell that forms the embryo. That's what you start with, right? Just like with the mustard plant. You take out all the DNA, which I'm just going to use one example because this is one of them and it's really easy to talk about. But there's a lot of them, a lot of different examples, okay? In this case, we're going to take all the DNA out that would make the eyes. Then, of course, the fruit fly is born without any eyes. You can then also breed this fruit fly with other fruit flies who don't have eyes, as I was just talking about. But no matter how many times they do this, no matter what they try, they take only one cell, they take out all the DNA that's supposed to make the eyes, so there's no eye DNA left. The eyes are automatically replaced every time, and it never takes more than 5 generations. So since this is one of the least horrifying fruit fly mutations, this is the picture I'm going to show you, where on the left you have a fruit fly with no eyes, and on the right, after 5 generations, no matter what, the eyes come back. And again, the 5 generations is the worst case scenario. And again, this is a very primitive insect that doesn't have anywhere near the kind of divine protection that we do. So the bottom line is that because our typical scientific viewpoint is this reductionistic idea that DNA as a molecule has some kind of tinker toys in it that make you who you are, and you can change the tinker toys, you could rewrite the operating system. Well, I said I wasn't going to insult the lead singer anymore, but you could rewrite the operating system, right? And if you rewrite the operating system, then what do you get? You get the eyes coming back, you get the legs removing from the head, you get the DNA healing itself, and you get the body no longer having any types of very toxic reactions. So this is the really hilarious part for the evil guys, is that no matter how hard they've tried to wipe out lots and lots of people, nature has this corrective reflex. It corrects everything. And I think that if a bug was coming out for whatever means last year, starting in January, right? If that bug came out, it probably got very quickly energetically rewritten and downgraded by the energy itself, and it probably was a lot less effective than whatever functions some folks might have been trying to gain. That's about all I'm going to say on that. But come back on Sunday, we'll do a lot more. All of these mutations depend on single genes. I propose that somehow these single gene mutations are changing the tuning of a part of the embryonic tissue such that it tunes into a different morphic field than it normally does, and so a different set of structures arise, just like tuning into a different channel on TV. In other words, it's like internet metaphor now, because this is written before the internet. He's downloading the code for the eyes, and then it gets put back into the DNA right where it belongs, because the body will repair the DNA. The body will replace the DNA. So this again is the science of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, the science of morphic fields. This is his idea of where this energy that our DNA is tapping into is coming from, and why there's only 10,000 genes difference between Caenorhabditis elegans and a human being. So he's got a lot of cool stuff, but in this particular experiment, what he's showing is that if you look at the average number of errors that a rat makes, and that's the y-axis, how many errors does he make going through a maze, and then how many generations? So they separate these rats from their parents. They have no direct connection with the parents whatsoever, and yet the babies keep learning how to solve the maze better and better and better. That's one example of these morphic fields in action, where we're downloading things and we're communicating with each other all the time. Sheldrake also asks us to look at the behavior of flocks of birds and schools of fish, and you'll see a school of fish, how they all seem to move instantaneously. So here we are wondering if this even exists, whereas these beings are benefiting from having an internet consciousness all the time. In other words, there's an internet between those fish. They're not separate beings. They're thinking with one mind, and it's an energy cloud. It's cloud computing. The birds are cloud computing, the fish are cloud computing, swarms of insects are cloud computing. They're not working with an individual free will. They're working with a collective consciousness that uses the group as a whole. And so the flock or the school is moving as a whole. You got me? So here's some other cool examples of, I mean, if you've ever seen some of the films of what these things look like, how the birds move together, it doesn't even seem possible that the speed of the nerves in the body would be fast enough for them all to see what each other is doing, because they can't see all of each other, and yet they move at the same speed. And then, mate, if you go on over to England, I'm going to talk a little bit like I'm from Queensland for a minute, mate. I'm going to say how you get these sheep together, and the sheep come into a circle, mate. They got to get together, and they all form a sheep circle. Well, yeah, that did happen, and that's one of these cryptic things that shows that there's energy fields in the Earth, and again, energy fields in the Earth and the grid is one of the things I'm going to cover in Gateway to Galactic Mind. So, again, AscensionMysterySchool.com. I'm just actually setting up some things that are very much more fascinating that I'm going to talk about in this conference, but just to get ready to talk about it, I got to build up these things for you in advance. So this all gets back to the idea, back to the slide, that the conscious mind acts as a shared energy field. So I want you to look at this for a second. And I'm going to do an experiment with you right now. This is a hidden figure puzzle. So I want you to look at this, and I want you to just think about in your mind what might be in here. What are we actually looking at? Just take a look at it and try to see if there's a hidden shape or a hidden figure. Do you see anything? Does anything look like it might be unusual? Let me read the comments. Does anybody see anything? Can you see what this is? Crockney rhyming slang. Thank you. Yes. David's in a weird mood and I love it. All right. Well, anyway. Yeah, you're damn right, mate. It's Australia. It's Queensland, Australia. Wood ducks. Wood ducks. Can't organise a piss up in a brewery, mate. All right, I gave you some of that. You love that? Okay, good. All right, so now let's look at this. What if you're seeing two people dancing? Do you see two people dancing? Do you see their hair? Like if the top middle of the figure is their hair joined together. So you got her hair on the left, his hair on the right, right on the top in the middle. She's in white, he's basically in black. She's got her arm around him, and they're dancing together. And then you look at the bottom, you can see their legs, you can see their feet. You got it yet? Yeah, you guys are starting to see it. So now we're going to draw it in, okay? So that's the two people dancing. So here again is the hidden figure before you solve the puzzle, and then here it is after you solve the puzzle. Okay, so what's going on here? Why does this matter? Because when you invent one of these and it's never been made before and nobody's ever solved it before, you can time how long it takes people to solve this puzzle. But once you've invented the puzzle and once a certain critical mass of people have solved the puzzle, now any new person solves the puzzle much more easily, much faster. It takes less time. They see the people dancing, whereas before they didn't. You want to try another one? Let's try another one. This is fun. Let's try another one. All right, here we go. So here's another one. There's a hidden figure in here. This one's actually easier than the first one. So, can anybody see it? Let me see the comments. Tell me if you got it. He says, ha, I got it. Okay, I don't see it. I see it now. Okay, what are you seeing, though? Wood ducks, wood ducks. Are there any wood ducks in there, mate? We got some bombs in there? I can't say that. That's slang. All right, anyway, here we go, folks. You ready for this? What if it's a horse and the horse is running real fast and there's a cowboy with a big cowboy hat on the top? Can you see it now? Yep. Cowboy, 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 horse and rider. Okay, you guys got it's so obvious now, right? Yep. Now you can see it. Isn't that amazing that you don't see it and then you do see it? Now all you guys are seeing it now, right? There he is. There's your cowboy. Once again, the really cool science that we've now discovered is that when this happens, when more people solve the puzzle, you can solve it much faster. And Sheldrake has a bunch of this. For example, when you take people who've never studied a certain language and then you have them feel confident about certain words, you have them guess their confidence of certain words. If you make fake words and you make real words that are in another language, people are more confident when they guess the real words as opposed to the fake words. So real words that humans are using here on Earth carry an energetic signature, and you will feel more confident in those words than in other words that are very similar but people fabricated. Okay, so now because I have to do this fast, I'm already an hour and a half in, I'm just going to keep plowing ahead to Dr. Glenn Ryan, going back to the slide now, who I did interview. So when you go to ascensionmysteryschool.com and you sign up for Gateway to Galactic Mind, you're going to see when the class comes out, we're going to release these over time, 2 stunning interviews that I did with this guy talking about his research and much, much, much more. You do not want to miss this. It's going to be totally amazing, worth the entire price of the class by itself, quite honestly. I do believe you will say that when you see it. So I geeked out with him on this professional set here. It's awesome. So this is his main experiment that I really love and why I interviewed him in the first place. He takes undifferentiated cells from a human placenta, okay? So that just means that it's somebody else's DNA, and he puts it into a test tube. This tube is then handed over to people who are trained in a technique they call freeze frame, part of the Institute of Heart Math, where they accurately reproduce strong human emotions. So when the people felt anger, the DNA molecule actually unwound and it quote unquote died. It actually was destroyed. However, when people felt love, the DNA rewound and actually healed a molecule that was otherwise dead. Now, I've been saying this for many years, and so when I get Glenn Ryan on camera and I dialogue with him about this, he goes, well, that wasn't really what we were trying to do, but it kind of ended up happening anyway, so yeah, I guess you could say that. Glenn Ryan's awesome, you know, and so the idea is that it wasn't like they planned on it, but somebody directed a great deal of anger into the DNA, and sure enough, it unwound and died. And the way you can tell is by how much ultraviolet light the DNA holds, because it turns out that healthy DNA holds more ultraviolet, and if you kill the DNA, the ultraviolet is no longer held. Once again, DNA is absorbing light. But forget about the light part for a second. Hold on. Whoa! What? the love heals the DNA and the anger kills the DNA, yes, that's what we're saying. Angry energy kills DNA. So when somebody's trying to send you angry energy, they might actually be causing cell damage in your body. You might get physical cell damage from other people's anger. Wait a minute, David. Isn't the whole point of the mind-body effect and the placebo that DNA is affected by placebos? If people believe they're taking a sugar pill that's actually the greatest drug of all time and it heals everything, and then everything heals, well, it's just a sugar pill, but your consciousness healed you, right? Well, Dr. Glenn Ryan is actually showing you on a direct microbiological level, at the molecular level of the DNA itself, that love heals the DNA. That love is the factor that biological life is growing from. This goes back to the concept in the law of one of the logos, the idea that the logos is the galactic mind and that it is love, and it also is Christ. It's the same thing. So this idea that you can get around it, you can get around the Christ consciousness, you can get around the logos, You're born in it, you're raised in it, and its fundamental essence is loving energy, which is why loving energy heals DNA, because there's an energetic interchange that our consciousness has with cells, and that's why we have healing power. And if you pray for someone, it's going to work, even if you don't believe that it will. Science has already proven that it does. So that's why it was so awesome to get Dr. Glenn Ryan in here. And again, I believe that interview alone, you're going to say, wow, that was worth the whole class. We already had people say that, actually. So this demonstrates that vital energy can be transferred between humans, and it also demonstrates that angry, aggressive people can absorb the vital energy from others. Hence, somebody else's DNA withers in the presence of your anger in the lab. So basically, when we're talking about this idea of evil extraterrestrials like the Draco, there's this concept of loosh, that they feed off of human misery, sadness, fear, and pain. Well, sure enough, when we're going through those emotions, we are shedding light out of our DNA, and they apparently come in to scoop it up, just like bugs will eat excrement. It's the same kind of concept. This may be a genetic holdover from the animal kingdom for survival. And I'm sorry, guys, we have a huge pollen count all the way up in the red here, so my nose is a little stuffy. I apologize. This may be a genetic holdover from the animal kingdom for survival. This is the survival of the fittest, where the more aggressive species ends up succeeding. That's the traditional view of genetics, right? That the alpha male is actually drawing vital energy from the group he protects to strengthen him for battle. So let's talk about that for a second. If people can learn that there's a cowboy on a horse in the hidden picture, or that there's two people dancing in the hidden picture, right? If it becomes easier to see the hidden picture, then that suggests there's an energetic template of information and knowledge that we all have access to. And as more of us add to it, it's like cloud computing. Certain thoughts add to other thoughts. That's why the multiples effect exists. Hundreds of examples of people independently inventing and discovering and patenting the same inventions at the same time. It's happened a lot, hundreds of occasions. So this informational blueprint, it can be tapped into. When more people solve the hidden figure puzzle, it's easier for you. And they demonstrated anecdotally with the crossword puzzle, right? The idea that if the crossword puzzle is published on Sunday in London, and then afterwards it becomes something else, and everybody else has looked at it by then. Well, once enough people look at the crossword puzzle, everybody solves the crossword puzzle more easily. This is widely seen anecdotally, and apparently it's true. That if you solve the puzzle on Sunday, it's going to be harder than if you solve it on Monday or Tuesday, just because of this science. That's just the way it works. But the other part that's so important is that loving energy can strengthen your DNA molecule. And you can have a person in a lab send energy into the DNA, and the DNA actually heals. So what happens if you have a leader, and you have all these people that want to send their prayers and love to that leader? You are sending energy to that person. You're pumping up their DNA. This is what the negative elite want. They want to be adored. The alpha male draws energy from the group. So this is what the negative elite want. They want to be worshipped. They want to get that energy from the public, and they're not getting it anymore. They're not getting the love. They're not getting the clicks. Platforms like what I'm using here, we're getting a lot more views than some other kind of big names. Just leave that there to outgas in the room. Also, this is why teams are more likely to win in a home stadium. They are not beholden to the same energies, because if they're in a foreign stadium and everybody in the stadium hates them, then they're getting knocked down energetically, whereas if their own guys are there to support them, they're going to get charged up energetically and they're going to do better. They're actually going to have better respiration, better athletic endurance, better muscle performance, better violent muscle contraction, better smooth muscle contraction, everything. When the people are sending you energy, your body is going to be supercharged, you're going to be healthier. So there's people that feed off of this like parasites. And that, again, is the essence of the negative ETs, where they actually feed off of the negative energy that the light that our DNA releases. So now this is where we're going to pivot once more, okay? So up until now, I've already told you a whole lot of stuff in less than 2 hours. I've told you about all these briefings that are going on that suggest that something big could be happening right around the corner. Biblical stuff could be right around the corner. Expect a power outage. Expect a big war. Expect ground troops. Expect the whole thing to go crazy. Sorry, expect that there's going to be more gas shortages. Please make sure your tank is filled up. It's probably not, but we don't know. Anything could happen, right? So then we have this thing where everybody's like, oh my God, people are getting this thing, and then it's changing their DNA, and everybody who got this is going to die. Look, I get it, okay? I've had the same thought. But this science that I just told you doesn't say that's what's going to happen. It says that your DNA is going to fix itself. At least 1 out of 10. Remember, all of the generations of fruit flies where you take their eyes away or you try to put legs in their head, the legs go away and they grow normally after only at most 5 generations. So I really don't think that that type of scenario is plausible. But this is now I want to get to the real core of why I had to do this talk, and that is what happens with this energetic system in the presence of stress. Back to the slide real quick. We're going to see that life actually spontaneously evolves in the presence of stress. So when you have stress, when something bad is happening to you, let's go back to this number 2. When something bad is happening to you, your soul, if you will, some part of your body, some part of your underlying energetic protective mechanism calls out to the field of information that knows what the crossword puzzle looks like, that knows there's a cowboy in the hidden figure, that knows there's 2 people dancing, right? It knows. That some part of you calls out for help to that field. And when it does, from a great level of emotional striving, it actually activates a yearning and a seeking in your genetics. It actually calls out for new information to heal you. So this is why prayer is so important. You have to call upon the information. This is a sacred science. It's the science of God, if you want to call it that. When you call upon the higher forces, when you call upon the universe for help, it actually opens up new information that comes into your cells and heals your cells. And even the most primitive organisms are still part of the one infinite creator, and they are still protected by this law. So let's talk about this now. This originally came from Dr. John Kearns, and the name is spelled that way. I'll save you a lot of trouble by seeing how it's spelled, because I had a hard time finding this. So what he's dealing with is he was experimenting with lactose-intolerant bacteria. Okay, back to 2. Lactose-intolerant bacteria mean that they cannot digest the proteins in milk. Milk is made of lactose, right? The proteins in milk require a certain shape of their mouth to be able to digest. And their mouth doesn't have the right shape. You got to be able to actually fit over the lactose protein. And their mouth, it's like a, if you're going to play the old games where you try to stick something in the hole and anyway, right? That's the you know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking of, there was a game called Perfection, right? You put all the pieces in and it pop and they all come out. Anyway, the mouth doesn't fit over the protein. So they don't want to eat lactose. They can't eat lactose. And so what Dr. John Kearns did, this very, very unethical experiment. What if you throw all those bacteria in nothing but lactose? They got nothing to eat but lactose. So if they can't eat the lactose, they're going to die. But wait a minute, David. Didn't you just say they're mouth doesn't fit over the lactose? Didn't you just say that their mouth can't eat the lactose? So yeah, if there's nothing else there but lactose, then they're all going to die, right? Go back to the slide. These bacteria spontaneously evolved new mouth parts within one lifetime so that they could actually eat the lactose. Holy crap. So Caenorhabditis elegans, the same guy that only has 24,000 genes and we have 34,000, right? So it's very similar to us in terms of genes, only 10,000 off, that's not very many. Normally he's lactose intolerant, and if you place them in a lactose-only environment, most of them will die. However, a small percentage of them survive because they are evolving on a very rapid, almost instantaneous scale within one lifetime. Just like the fruit flies, just like the mustard plant, folks, same things happening here. They fix themselves. This worm spontaneously changed the shape of his mouth so that he could digest lactose. So I want you to see the pictures of this. It's a little bit gross, not too much, but this is the microbe. Remember, he has 969 cells in his body, only something like 300 brain cells, 360, whatever, I forget the exact number. But he's hardly got any brain cells, but this is his typical mouth, okay? And so that mouth doesn't have the right shape to eat the lactose. And here it is again from the side, which looks an awful lot like certain types of cactus that grow. We're just going to leave that one there too. I'm going to talk more about those cacti, because that would probably also get me banned. But anyway, so this mouth in one lifetime is actually evolving and changing. I don't have a picture of what it looks like afterwards, okay, because I've never seen one. But supposedly, if you look at this picture afterwards, the mouth is completely frickin' different. So again, in the presence of extreme stress, human beings evolve. What happens if you're going through a solar flash? What happens if solar energy is changing? Some of us are going to evolve. If you can adapt, if you can handle the stress, right? This is evolution. This is how it really works. Stress does cause evolution. Let me give you another example. Now that we've a much, much larger creature, because, oh, David, it's only 969 cells. It's just microbes. David doesn't know anything. No, you're wrong. You know why? Podarcus sicula, Italian wall lizard. Here we go. Only in 36 years, they had a gigantic evolution. So here's the story. In 1971, 5 adult pairs of Podarcus sicula, the Italian wall lizard, were moved from their home island in the South Adriatic Sea. Their home island was called Pod Capisti, and it was a desert island where they only ate small insects. Then these scientists moved them over to another island called Pod Mercaru, which had a lot more vegetation. And sure enough, these little lizards evolved into becoming vegetarians, believe it or not. The scientists did this in 1971. They only had 5 breeding pairs. So again, remember, look at number 1 up there, 5 adult pairs. That's all you got, okay? South Adriatic Sea. They did this in 1971. They transplanted these desert lizards into a tropical jungle, so a totally different climate than what they're used to. And they only came back 36 years later, okay? And in just that short length of time, they go back and they measure the lizards of how big are their nostrils, the snout vent is nostrils, right, like the nose, how big are their heads, and how large is their body. They took DNA off of their clippings from their tails to confirm that these were genetically identical to the source population. Thankfully, they didn't kill them. That's really nice. And what they found is unbelievable. Striking differences in the size of the head and the shape of the head, a much higher degree of bite power, and new structures that grew into their digestive tract after only 36 years. So they actually grew these cecal valves that are intended to hold fermentation, because you have to ferment the vegetables. The cecal valve actually has to create a pocket of fermented material so the plants can be broken down. They didn't even have cecal valves in their bodies before. You drop them off on a new island, and they grow all this new stuff. Insects are very soft and tender, right? So they can bite into them really easily. It's not a big deal. Whereas plant fibers are woody, and it takes a lot more chewing. So they get a much bigger head, and they get much bigger bite strength. Well, then their body can't really digest plants at all because they're meant to be in a desert. So what do? They grow cecal valves, and in only 5 generations. Now, and it probably was a lot faster than that. This is just when they studied it. There's all these lizards from those original breeding pairs, and they're all over the island, and they all have cecal valves, and they all are vegetarians. Isn't that amazing? Once again, just like in the case of the little roundworm, stress causes a spontaneous evolution in the body. And so now we're going to show you some different pictures of these lizards so you can see and just kind of get a mental visual of how the head could get larger, how the body could get larger. The veggie lizards actually got heavier and had a stronger bite pressure. So these adaptive changes allowed them to eat plants for the first time, and they also, interestingly, stopped being as aggressive. They no longer had the instinctive behavior of defending their territory. They were able to integrate with others. So they became a lot less hot-headed when they were no longer vegetarians, or no longer meat eaters, apparently. So I want you to think about the implications of this, folks. Because what's happening now is that we appear to be going through some type of ongoing energetic upgrade. And this is reported in these ancient prophecies, that we're going through some sort of energetic change, that Meleka kings will rule over the earth, and wedded to sinful practices, they declare there is nothing in deposit. So I want you to think about the implications of life evolving spontaneously in the presence of stress, and look at how much stress is going on now. And look at the idea that if Caenorhabditis elegans is dropped into lactose, where it has nothing else to eat but lactose, and its mouth isn't literally even in the right shape to digest lactose, in 1 generation, its mouth completely changes. You say, well, David, it doesn't mean that a human being's mouth is going to change in 1 generation. I don't know, okay? But it only has 969 cells, so maybe it can change faster, but these are changes in 1 generation. So there's only 969 cells, but we only have 10,000 more genes than they do, right? So maybe we could be changing in 1 lifetime. Maybe we are already changing in 1 lifetime. And maybe some people are changing in a way where they will be able to handle the lactose, and others will not be able to handle the lactose. You follow me? Do you understand what I'm really trying to tell you? Because it gets back into genetics and what we were talking about before, and DNA alteration and the things that people are so upset about. Some people will be rewriting their DNA. So even if there would have been a problem, there's not going to be a problem. But more importantly, the big picture is what happens when you're exposed to the energy of the solar flash, when you're exposed to pure, raw, white Christ light. Are you going to be able to handle it? Because that's what this appears to be. The pure, undifferentiated energy of intelligent infinity comes out of the sun, and if you're ready for it, you get to stay here, and if you're not ready for it, then you get relocated very peacefully, and that's still an awesome process. That you'd think you're going through the ascension just from that. But if you get to stay on Earth, then something much more amazing happens, because now you get your superhero powers activated. So, the question really is, back to the slide now, what is going to happen to you when this solar flash occurs? Can you evolve and adapt to meet the new energy? And how are you handling the stress? Well, there's a lot more that I could talk about, but that's why we have Ascension Mystery School. And this is the 3rd one, so it's going to be the last one in the series. What I hope you've seen already is a very, very compelling idea that DNA is not the basis of life, that life is fundamentally energetic. It is the mind of the Creator. It is conscious, it is alive, it is aware, and it wants our very best good. So let's go over to this one now. Sweetheart, because my wife, I wanted to have her come in at the end. We're ready for you. I don't know. I guess I have to keep talking if she isn't here yet. But so let me just extemporize on this a little bit more. What we're dealing with here appears to be that all these ancient prophecies are steering us towards something new, something different, something very, very exciting. And that process has been described to us in many ancient traditions. So I have more slides. Since Beth hasn't come downstairs yet, I'm going to do a little more for you. So One of the things that I didn't talk about last time is the Stoicism. And they have a prophecy of this, and this is in a lot of ancient texts. They call it ekpyrosis. And so this comes off of Wikipedia. It was one of the only sources I could find. Ekpyrosis is a Roman Stoic belief in the periodic destruction of the cosmos by a great conflagration, which means a massive fire, every great year. Where did they get this from? They got this from their gods. They got this from the beings that came to Earth to teach us really cool stuff. The cosmos is then recreated, which they call palingenesis, only to be destroyed again at the end of the new cycle. So this is again the idea of the solar flash, and they got this from the ETs. This form of catastrophe is the opposite of cataclysmos, which is the destruction of the earth by water. The concept of ekpyrosis is attributed to Chrysippus by the Greek historian Plutarch. Now, so this is very ancient. One of the things that is so crazy when you're trying to research this particular subject, and so I'm going to save you a lot of time here, is that there's actually 4 different ways that they spell this depending on which scholar you're reading and which document you're reading. So you actually have to look up all 4 of these to look for this. But this is a weird little word that's got 4 different ways to spell it, and you can go look it up, and it's the science of the solar flash. And it's all these ancient prophecies that said that the sun was going to do this at the end of the age. So since I still I'm waiting for my wife to come downstairs, which is fine. You know, you guys are going to get a little more material while we're waiting. So are we entering into an area of higher energy? And how would we know? Well, this is a complex discussion, but we're going to launch into a little of it now. Right now, redshift is a microwave vibration of the microwave energy being given off by stars, and it is usually interpreted as being a function of distance. So what they do then is they take a bandwidth of the microwave spectrum and then they arbitrarily assign colors to it. Okay? So this is a cosmic distance, supposedly. This is the conventional view, and everybody says this. But what we've now learned is that redshift is actually more about energy frequency than distance. Okay, sweetheart, I'm just about ready for you. Yep, good. Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Halton Arp is one of the scientists who wrote about this because astronomers are using redshift to try to tell you where everything is. This is their main calculation of distance. So just so that I'm not doing this too fast, the idea, it comes from the so-called Doppler shift. The idea that as a car or a train is going by, it goes like that, right? What they then assume is that they believe that the universe is expanding, and that as stars are moving away from us, they're accelerating. And so they make this distortion in the sound, except that this is microwave sound, right? They make a distortion in the sound like, and so the idea is that as it goes towards the red end of the spectrum, it's farther away. And as it goes towards the blue end of the spectrum, it's closer. So that's the rationale. And they don't want to give this up because countless millions of dollars of grant money have been awarded for this research, and this is the conventional view of how we analyze how far away things are in the cosmos. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that make that not the case, and nobody wants to look at it in the mainstream. So this is one of Halton Arp's classics, where you're looking at a galaxy, which is NGC 7603, and then a pulsar or quasar that's next to it. And it's clearly connected by a filament, but the redshifts are so different that theoretically they should be very, very far apart. So this is Dr. William Tift, and what he then discovered, he starts looking at all the redshift all over the galaxy and all over the universe, really. And he finds that, wait a minute, redshift is only occurring in certain intervals, and this is ridiculous, because this would put the Earth at the center of the universe, and every galaxy or every star in the entire universe is an exact quantized interval away from us. Because remember, this is what redshift actually does. If redshift is a function of distance, then the entire universe is a series of shells like layers of an onion, and we are at the exact center. That's very, very unlikely. So redshift is not a function of distance at all, and it's a very strange mystery as to why it only occurs in certain intervals. We are going to cover this more in Gateway to Galactic Mind. Well, sure enough, the science that Tift has come up with I believe, is that he's showing that these are different zones of energy. So for example, what we're looking at here is the Virgo supercluster, and what you're actually seeing is all the different redshifts inside the Virgo supercluster. So the ones in the center are supposedly much, much more far away than the ones on the outside. So these are galactic energy zones. Now he has actually looked at these over time and seen that they expand away from the center of the galaxy. So they're drifting, they're migrating, right? And there's lots of different examples of this. And so every galaxy they've looked at, they find these zones of redshift. So is every galaxy stretched away from us like a windsock where we're in the center? No, because the center of the galaxy is supposed to be a lot farther than the outside, and there's these layers inside the galaxy of redshift. Redshift is not distance, but people will literally try to get you killed if you say that, or at least back in the 1970s. And they would have been geeky astronomers who don't want to lose their grants. And they probably wouldn't have actually done it. They just would have complained a lot. Well, they smoke cigarettes feverishly and they drink coffee. That's probably what's going to happen. Why do I say such stupid stuff? I don't know. I love it. So anyway, Tift's explanation is that these microwave regions are actually artifacts of different zones of time flow, folks. So even as this paper called three-dimensional quantized time in cosmology. Whoa. He says, starting from a model of 3D time in units of the Planck energy, it is possible to model fundamental particles and forces. Masses are associated with 3D volumes of time. Forces are related to 4D space-time, blah, 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 blah. So here's the part that I want you to read. And we got about 5 minutes. I just want to get through this now that I started this. At a given cosmic radius in time-space, or what he calls tau space, meaning at a given, so he's talking about these shells, right? So a radius is the distance from the center. So there's different shells at different radii. So at a given cosmic distance from the center of the galaxy in time-space, a galaxy will occupy a specific temporal state. This means that a galaxy must exist in a particular rate and flow of time in each of these zones. Now look at this. And he's got very advanced theoretical knowledge that shows how this works, folks. It must change that temporal state in discrete steps. Now, what does the word discrete mean? It means separate, distinct, and discontinuous. Discrete is something that is distinctly separate. So there is a distinctly separate change in the rate of time that occurs when the galactic energy wave expands into your solar system. Do you think maybe this has something to do with these ancient prophecies? Absolutely. So the time flow itself will change in discrete steps. And remember the Muslim prophecy we did on Sunday said, time will stop. All time comes to a halt at this point, and then it changes afterwards. So this is a Discover magazine article from 1993 that talks about his work and covers, because he's a mainstream scientist. This is not pseudoscience, so we don't need to see something from Phil. Just leave it alone, buddy. This guy's real, okay? More recently, Tift has also claimed to have evidence from observing the same galaxies over a period of 10 years that their redshifts are changing over time, meaning that these zones, again, are expanding from the center. We may be seeing some form of galactic evolution taking place before our very eyes. Well, this is why all the planets are heating up in our solar system, right? So again, these zones of energy expanding through our galaxy, the idea, I want you to try to visualize this, that your star stays in the same, let's go to this one. Your star stays in the same place as it orbits around the galaxy, as it revolves in the galaxy. You're staying in the same orbit, but these zones are expanding. So at some point, the expansion of the zone collides with your solar system, all the planets charge up, and then what does Tift think is going to happen? Let's go to that. So again, Tift found that they are gradually these zones are gradually expanding away from the center. They crash into your solar system at a set interval, and then he actually says that your star's light will undergo a spontaneous quantum shift. So this is my view of what this thing looks like. Spherical donuts of energy expanding out from the center, moving through the galaxy as the stars stay in the same revolution. These zones crash into them. So this is what he says at the moment that you cross the boundary. This is what his science says is going to happen, okay? A crossing normal to the space domain boundary would be about a half a minute in duration. certainly enough to leave a trace in our geological history. But the crossings that would occur at more acute angles, some 4 times per galactic cycle, could be of several minutes in duration, and the loss of gravity between matter temporarily astride the boundary would be devastating at such times. In other words, his model has calculated that gravity itself is not going to work. So if you're not already having enough trouble in the solar flash, now you're going to start levitating, right? Hey, wait a minute, isn't that the Christian idea of the rapture? I don't know, what do you think? The loss of gravity, back to the slide. I go further in my own speculations by suggesting that any normal hydrogen star can, if it happens to traverse a space domain boundary at a very acute angle, experience, drum roll please, the traumatic upheaval of its protons sitting astride a boundary between space and anti-space in the sense of charge polarity inversion, a clear recipe for decay. Here it comes, folks, shedding an enormous amount of energy in what surely is a supernova. So just what he's saying is that when these zones of energy that he's now discovered that have different microwave values, you can measure it down to the decimal point, what their microwave frequencies are. And they're quantized, right? There's not all this stuff in between, so it's not really distance, it's not redshift. Those distances, those zones of energy are expanding, and what he's saying is that when it hits your stars might shed an enormous amount of energy and give off what would surely be a supernova. So back to the slide. Boom. So the last thing I want to give you, and then we're going to bring Beth in, is Dr. Benny Peiser. This is just a minute, so 1 minute slide here. This guy actually is one of the only people besides myself who's ever on a mainstream level said that the sun is charging up the whole solar system, or at least most of it. This is from March 12th, 2007. So check this out. He says, I think it is an intriguing coincidence that warming trends have been observed on a number of very diverse planetary bodies in our solar system. And he said, perhaps this is just a fluke. But this was in 2007. So Benny Peiser, I want to give you full credit for this. Thank you for being one of the only people to stick your neck out and say, yes, it's the whole solar system. All right, so now we're going to pivot the show. And I'm bringing in my wife, and I'm very excited to have her here because we got singing bowls, we got meditations to do. So let's cut over to this guy.
Did you talk about the cosmic fluff?
Did I talk about the cosmic fluff? Actually not. But we could. Actually, so yeah, while you're with me, let's run this one last thing, because this is incredible. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Donald Szymanski is the scientist at NASA who was studying the area outside our solar system, which is called the LISM, or local interstellar medium. And I'm not going to make any LISM jokes today, okay? Let's just leave this fluffy, frothy stuff. We're not going to talk about it. So anyway, this interstellar material is what's going to have the higher charge. So Don Szymanski is the scientist who's actually out there studying this. And of course, if you can scribble equations on a whiteboard behind you, you got to have some knowledge, right? Well, he's got a lot more than that, folks. He's got all these professional affiliations, his positions in NASA, his awards. But this is a very important little thing on his website where he gives out his curriculum, because this is what he says. And there's the link if you want to go look this up, his biography. He said, research on the properties of the local interstellar medium have been carried out in scattered periods beginning in 1978. But whoa, what's this? NASA has shown a persistent pernicious bias. Pernicious is a very nasty word, folks. A pernicious bias against work on the effects of the neutral gas in the LISM. Well, that's the charge up of the gases around our solar system. That's the proof of the interplanetary climate change in the galactic energy field, right? NASA doesn't want him to do this work. They have a pernicious evil bias. So what exactly does pernicious mean? Let's look it up, because this is the word he used, folks. Causing insidious harm or ruin. Ruinous, injurious, hurtful. Number 2, deadly, fatal. Number 3, evil and wicked. NASA has shown a persistent, pernicious bias against any research that would show that the interstellar medium is charging up. So he says here that the formation of the termination shock and collision with the solar wind, This dominant role has been supported primarily by the Space Science Division. So, nobody else had really followed up on this because apparently NASA is going to hurt you or kill you if you try to do this research, but apparently nobody threatened Dr. Merov Ofer, thankfully, because she actually did this work independently of Dr. Szymanski. She apparently didn't get the threats that he did, and she proved that we have this massive amount of energy coming in to our solar system. So you've studied this as much as I have. You want to tell people about what she discovered? And you want to pull focus for us, buddy? We'll stay on this camera for a while.
This is one of my favorite subjects. I call it the cosmic fluff, but it's actually called the local fluff.
Or the lism.
Or the lism. I think local fluff is a little better.
Yeah, lism doesn't really sound good.
So Dr. Merov Ofer found that there is this area of energy that we're now moving through as a solar system in the universe that was somehow survived the explosion of a couple, what do you call them?
Supernovas.
Yeah, supernovas.
The supernova didn't blow it away.
And it's 6,000 degrees Celsius, and it's highly...
And 100 degrees Celsius boils water, folks.
6,000.
6,000 degrees Celsius. It is so incredibly hot. And what do you think is going to happen if your solar system goes into an area of extreme heat? Do you think it might change your solar system?
Heat up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's also it's highly magnetic.
That's right.
Extremely
Incredible.
magnetic.
And all the planets are becoming more magnetically charged, and we're going to talk about that in the class on Sunday. Well,
Yeah,
not this Sunday, but later.
So, NASA says that it shouldn't be there.
That's right.
For some reason, NASA doesn't want it to be there.
They don't like you talking about it. It's a pernicious bias.
And the data, when you show your data on it, the data stops in 2005 or something on a lot of them. Remember? It's really hard to find
a lot of this
current
interplanetary
data on it. Mm-hmm.
A lot of this interplanetary climate change stuff just kind of drops off after 2005. And again, I think it's NASA's pernicious bias. So do you think maybe there's a scientific cover-up as well?
Sounds like it.
Exactly. The scope of what you've been lied to about is much bigger than you think, and we've just been working on the interstellar stuff.
So it is really fascinating to see the pictures of the planets, and David shows that really beautifully, how their weather is changing, they're heating up. You see Jupiter's red spot is now a light salmon color. There's lots of different things going on.
Yeah, actually, we have a picture of that.
Which is fascinating news, and interesting that it's not on the news.
Let me just find that for you, because there's a couple shots of all the planets that are really great. Okay.
Yeah,
So
Jupiter is really
so we can just talk through a couple of these
Neptune
real
is
quick.
really
So
impressive.
I'm not going to do all these, but I want you guys to see this. So this is Mercury, and Mercury on the left, just like she said, there's more magnetic fields. So on the left, that's the way it was in the 1970s, and the blue is magnetic energy. And then on the right, in the mid-2000s is what we got. So all this magnetic energy showed up. Venus had a 2,500% increase in the green glow on the night side in less than 20 years. The great red spot is now the great salmon spot. As you just said, sweetheart, there it is. That color, look, they've been studying this thing for 400 years. Since the invention of the telescope, it was always red. Now it's changed color. Jupiter is also now doing this very crazy stuff. You see all those storms along the equator, all those rings, those circles, those are all new. All these weird storms. Europa was supposed to be this bright on the left, now it's this bright on the right. All the other Jupiter moons are doing this. This is because all the plasma coming into our solar system. Saturn had this crazy discharge of energy. We're going to talk a lot more about this in the class, where all this stuff appeared in the northern hemisphere. It stretched 3/4 of the way across the whole planet. This is also the hot spots that we see on Uranus that were never there before. None of this stuff was there before. And Neptune has now gone nuts. So this is what Neptune looks like now. This is the way Neptune looked in 1989. This is Neptune in 1999. This is 2002, 2004, and now 2017.
So
You think maybe something's happening?
What do you think the Earth looks like right now?
Well, actually, we have that. So the next slide here is of the Earth. And on the South Pole, I'm sorry, this is the North Pole. This is what's called noctilucent clouds, and this is the increased brightness on the Earth's surface. So the Earth itself is becoming brighter, and it also even grew this new belt of energy in the Earth's magnetic field And so again, you know, Dr. William Tift is saying that we're going to get a quantum leap as we go into this zone. The solar system is showing us this. That's what we're talking about.
So what if like that's the Kali Yuga, you know, when we enter into this
We'll stay on this. You can
fluff or
focus us
something,
again.
you know?
Yeah. Thank you, buddy.
So it's quite fascinating because maybe we go around this if the cycles of time repeat, and that's one of the main subject matters of the Galactic Mind, the Ascension Mystery School this year.
That's right.
Is that repeating cycles of time. So maybe we go through this, you know, every Kali Yuga as these yugas repeat. And that's why perhaps the prophecies know what's going to be happening. But imagine what's happening to us.
That's right.
You know, there's got to be something happening to
and
us
we
as
talked
well.
about stress, that, you know, Caenorhabditis Elegans, you put it in lactose and it grows a new mouth, right? You take the Drosophila, you try to have legs growing out of his head, in 5 generations or less, the legs go away. And there's nothing in the DNA that could have done this. The mustard weed heals itself. And then the lizards, when you take them out of the desert and you put them into the jungle, they grow a whole new stomach with a whole new digestive organ. And they digest plants.
So clearly we can do this too.
When we get exposed to this new energy, if you are adapting to it, this is the key. But remember, this is an elective process. And the key to adapting to this is how kind you are. It's actually spiritual. So your spiritual progress determines what's going to happen to you when the sun does its thing. That's the bottom line of what we're talking about. And then how do we help you get ready for this so that just in case all this crazy stuff that we're talking about is real, are you actually going to be ascending? That's a very, very important question that I hope you take very seriously.
So, you know, for me, I do Qigong every day, and that's for me a way to digest the energies because we're consciously tuning into the energy of the earth and
Absolutely.
the energy of the stars, which are all suns. So, consciously receiving that light into our body and digesting it energetically and spiritually, and really transmuting everything with love. So it's a very personal practice for all of us
That's right.
to do our work of harmonizing with great change.
And we could talk a little bit about that nourishment is energetic, right? So if you eat vegetables that are organic, they have these biophotons in them, and you're nourishing you're feeding the light back into your DNA from the inside by digesting the light, and it spreads into your body.
So you can tell your children that, you know, good reason to eat your vegetables because it has sunlight in it, and the sunlight then goes into your DNA inside of your body, and it nourishes your DNA that way.
That's right. But anyway, I'm David, and this is Gurley, and this is my beautiful wife, Elizabeth. We are so grateful to have you here. We are so grateful for this time that we shared with you. And I think I might come in under 2.5 hours at this point. We have 1 minute left before 2.5 hours.
All right.
We've been live. You
I
want to
thought
say
you were
anything?
definitely going to go for 3.
Nah, I'm trying not to because it's around 5 o'clock and we don't know if it's even going to stay on.
Thank you all for being here. Blessings to you and your family. Stay healthy, stay strong, and stay in love.
Thanks a lot, everybody.